Early Path of Exile boss designs sucked. Throughout the Path of Exile 1 campaign, each area usually contained at least one mini-boss, a unique monster supposed to be armed with interesting skills and abilities in a compelling environment meant to challenge players and their characters. In actuality, most of these bosses were far too easy. They were simple, their names looked different, and they had unique appearances, but they didn't stand out as mechanically interesting fights. Truthfully, the only true challenging boss fights in Path of Exile 1's campaign were the Act bosses, from Reveal and the Vel Oversoul to Malachi and Kitava. Besides these 10 standout fights, and arguably Brutus and a few of the god battles in the latter half of the campaign, no other boss fights were notable. Almost every area mini-boss was also lackluster. Even the developers knew this. It's not even for a single reason. They are poorly designed due to a variety of factors, from uninteresting abilities and pitiful health pools to poor randomized placements and lack of reason to engage most of them. Of course, this changed for the most part in Path of Exile 1's endgame with the pinnacle bosses, foes like the Shaper, the Maven, and the Eater of Worlds. However, many of the map bosses in PoE were and are pulled from the uninspired campaign bosses and mini-bosses. Worry not, potentially Sane Exile, for in Path of Exile 2, everything surrounding bosses and boss design appears tremendously improved, from their mechanical design to appearance. They're substantially better, which should mean better bosses across the board. A great thing for players like me who enjoy challenging fights in their ARPGs. Oh, and they're also adding boss health bars. Hopefully, that's retroactive. Now, let's take a closer look at PoE 1 versus PoE 2 bosses. We've seen a decent chunk of Path of Exile 2's first act, plus a few tidbits of Act 2 and beyond. Therefore, we can conduct a rather fair comparison between Path of Exile 1, Act 1, and PoE 2, Act 1, right here and now, based on 2019 footage and information. Do note, if anything, the overall quality has likely improved. The first boss of PoE 1 is Hillock on the Twilight Strand. He attacks slowly, but he hits hard. At 50% health, he pulls a sword out of his chest and begins swinging quicker. That is it. In PoE's second campaign, the opening boss is the Bloated Miller on the riverbank. He begins with a huge saw blade, swings with his fist and the weapon, slightly regenerates at a certain health threshold, and can charge you. Like Hillock, it looks like you can heal through him, but already his ability set is greater than basic Hillock's. Next up, quite close together in each campaign, is the Necromancer in PoE 1 and the Devourer in PoE 2. The Necromancer is literally just a basic monster in PoE. Cadaverous the Defiler raises the dead and debuffs you, dealing barely any damage itself. He's a hit point sponge, essentially. The Devourer in PoE 2, though, is a near-death cinematic experience deep within an area called the Mud Burrow. The beast tunnels under the ground, keeping segments of its body above ground. Upon its burst through the mud floor, it causes an explosion. If you're in melee range, it swings its insectoid arms heavily or goes in for a bite. If you're distant, it shoots globs of poison or, rarely, a huge poison area of effect. Luckily, you can hide behind its exposed body to avoid the attack entirely. It's so much more involved, tactical even. I can imagine the hardcore deaths now. From the man Chris Wilson himself, this PoE 2 fight lines up almost exactly with the Captain Fairgraves battle in PoE 1. Captain Fairgraves summons a few waves of generic ghostly skeletons and throws a spectral weapon your way. That's it. The corrupted Lachlann combat is more involved on every level. He capitalizes on your movement with multiple attacks, his visuals are creepier and more imposing, and like multiple other bosses in PoE 2, he forces you to engage in the battle and move around. He's not just a hit point sponge or a boss you can spam your skills on, it seems. These are the type of boss battles I'm here for. The final Act 1 comparison is Brutus in PoE 1 and the Crowbell in PoE 2. By far, this is the closest in decent design of the batch we've examined. Brutus wields 3 skills besides a basic attack: a chain hook that pulls characters close, 3 repeated area of effect slams, and a stunning slam that launches a delayed ground slam wave. That's a decent set, plus the setting is stellar, deep within a bloodied prison and always a surprise to first-time players. Intentionally, he's the butcher equivalent of Path of Exile 1. The Crowbell is split into 2 phases, No Bell and Bell. No Bell, it has a huge leap slam attack, a massive ground slam, a screaming enrage, and a wave slam attack very similar to Brutus. Once it rips out the bell, it gains a line slam, a double sweep, and a charging sweep attack. All together, along with the changing scenery, it's a great fight that brings you deeper and deeper into the hunting grounds. Some might argue all of these Act 1 examples were some of the earliest bosses crafted by grinding gear games. While that's true, most of the area bosses throughout Path of Exile 1 follow the same design. Quest and Act bosses in the campaign are superior set pieces with care put in, but even all but the Act bosses are dwarfed by the glimpses of PoE 2's boss set. Of course, we've only seen snippets of PoE 2 boss design, but I think plenty of these these bosses are being created by the folks also placing new endgame and league bosses into Path of Exile 1. But before we peer into what might be in PoE 2's future, please consider subscribing to the channel if you enjoy the content and would like to see more in your future. Every new subscriber and all notification bell exile helps. Newer bosses dropped into Path of Exile, primarily in league content and PoE's endgame, outclass almost anything in the Path of Exile 1 campaign. Along with Atziri and the Elder, the Shaper was among one of the first endgame bosses added to Path of Exile. Of the three, the Shaper was the best designed, just above Queen Atziri. His beam is iconic among PoE players. The Maven was yet another excellent introduction into PoE, melding together various mechanical elements previously unseen in the game. Every good boss fight should achieve this while revamping or revitalizing previously seen game mechanics. The Eater of Worlds is one of the newest pinnacle bosses dropped into PoE, along with the Searing Exarch and their two Guardian bosses. All four fights are memorable, from arena to moveset, and the former two's Uber versions are among the hardest content in the game. Cirrus was one of the most controversial pinnacle bosses in terms of design, especially his color scheme choice upon his release, but he's always been a challenging fight that can be trivialized by overwhelming damage or completely understanding his mechanics. The Trial Master was an extremely rare boss encounter introduced in Ultimatum League, another well-designed boss that was and is way too difficult to access. The Redeemer, Veritania, came in alongside Cirrus, Awakener of Worlds, and is one of his Guardian bosses, a Conqueror of the Atlas. A great arena, a varied moveset, and sweet voice lines. Each of these is at the quality I'm anticipating for the upcoming PoE 2 bosses. Truly, no exaggerations. They've taken their time to blow us out of the water. It's going to happen. We've zipped through plenty of other PoE 2 bosses in the 2 trailers, 2 official gameplay segments, and 2 teasers we've been given. Even these brief glimpses play swimmingly. In the Act 2 showcase, our Exile battled the creature that caused the ceiling to collapse in, revealing light and safe spots from future cave-ins. They fought a dexterous spear-wielding Marikath with a decently interesting batch of abilities. They chased away the Perennial King, a model extremely similar to the Searing Exarch pinnacle boss of PoE's endgame today. Finally, we witnessed the entire Bone Colossus battle, an encounter with 2 deadly bosses in an enclosed pit of carved skeletons and ribs. Yet another visually stunning fight. From every angle, the Path of Exile 2 bosses are massive improvements over their PoE 1 counterparts. For those searching for engaging battles, dazzling visuals, and, hopefully, meaningful reasons to down these bulky foes, you'll surely be pleased with boss design in PoE 2. As our characters amass strength, we'll easily notice these powerhouses fall faster, but we'll still be able to appreciate their visuals and mechanics that challenged us dearly during our characters' early hours. For those of you who want to run over bosses with little to no trouble, at any character power level, you might want to stick to the Path of Exile 1 campaign. I know I'll be choosing the PoE 2 campaign when it hits to get smashed by a barrage of bosses. I'll see you there. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and hit the bell for more Path of Exile content. Plus, give it a like and share your totally not unhinged opinion in the comments. I'd love to see your version of the vision. Massive shout out to the channel's current patrons and members. Thank you for your support. Tala Moana.